Hello, my name is Lucas Yonker, and my Doyle Talk topic is on end poverty. Poverty is simply just the state of being extremely poor. Many people around the world are affected by poverty indirectly or live in an impoverished nation. By 2030, 167 million children will live in extreme poverty if the world does not take action. Poverty is not having enough material possessions or income for a person's needs. Poverty may include social, economic, and political elements. There are two main types of poverty, absolute and relative. Absolute poverty is the complete lack of the resources needed to meet basic personal needs. An example of this is food, shelter, and clothing. Relative poverty is when people lack the minimum amount of income needed in order to maintain the standard average of living. An example of this is someone who is unemployed and requires government assistance for their income. Facts and statistics. Nearly half the world's population, that's more than 3 billion people, live less on $2.50 a day. 80% of the world's population lives less than $10 a day. And 1 billion children worldwide are living in poverty right now. Microeconomics. The opportunity cost for not taking action to end poverty would have many repercussions. Poverty affects society's health and violence. Bad sanitation, for example, makes it better to spread old and new diseases, and when people lack the basic needs such as food and water, they are more vulnerable to becoming ill. Another repercussion of not taking action is the effect poverty has on the global economy. When poverty levels in a country are high, consumers usually spend less money. This can hurt the commercial and manufacturing economies, which eventually lead to a decline in the GDP of the country. Macroeconomics. The next graph in macroeconomics is the global unemployment rate from 2008 to 2010. As you can see, the unemployment rates have spiked since the recession of 2008, which lasted about 18 months and had a global GDP decline of about negative 5.1%. The unemployment rate is still relatively high as the global economy is still recovering from the recession. The last graph in macroeconomics is the global economy by GDP. Each country is ranked as a percentage out of 100. The higher the percentage, the bigger the impact a country has on the global economy. For example, in impoverished countries such as South Africa and Nigeria, they make up a very small amount of the global economy due to the lack of people just simply not working and contributing to the economy. Solution. The number one solution that I found through my research is creating jobs. The best pathway out of poverty is a well-paying job. The recession of 2008 led to many people losing their jobs due to businesses closing their doors. To get back to pre-recession employment levels, we must create 5.6 million jobs. To accelerate job growth in the global economy, governments should invest in job-creating strategies such as developing renewable energy sources and renovating abandoned housing. We should also build on improving subsidized employment to help the long-term unemployed enter the workforce. Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham is the first philosopher that would agree with these solutions because he's the founder of modern utilitarianism, which is the most ethical choice, is the one that will produce the least amount of suffering and the greatest happiness. He believes that decisions should be made according to the majority of the people who would benefit from it. For example, provide impoverished countries with basic needs such as quality education so that they may have the knowledge to enter the workforce and contribute to a country's economy. Milton Friedman. He also goes along with the idea of utilitarianism because he believes that solving the problem of poverty should not just be limited to our communities and our cities, but it should benefit the entire world. He once said, "What are we here for? We're here to try to make the world a little bit better than when we found it." One way Friedman tried to make the world a better place was the introduction of the negative income tax, which essentially is a way to provide people below a certain income level with money. This technique would benefit the economy in 3 ways. First being, working always pays more than not working. Other welfare programs do the opposite, which is if you earn an extra dollar, you lose $2 of benefits. Secondly, the NIT replaces the army of bureaucrats giving out things such as food stamps, medical care, and housing assistance. Lastly, the welfare money would actually make it to its intended recipient. In continents such as Africa, fewer than 15 cents of every dollar finds its way to the poor. These 3 improvements of the NIT would help benefit the poor in the global economy. Underlying geopolitical reasons. The graph that I've chosen for this section is the share of the population living in extreme poverty as of 2017. This graph shows the amount of poverty in each country by percentage from a range of 0 to 100. As you can see, countries and continents such as Africa have a poverty rate as high as 100%, and continents such as North America and Europe have very lower poverty rates. But why is there such a drastic change in the amount of poverty around different parts of the world? It is simply because the population in continents such as Africa do not have access to things like a proper education, which makes them low contributors to the global economy because instead of working, they're busy trying to feed their families or struggling to survive in a war-torn country. And countries such as Canada and the US have stronger economies because most people living in those countries already have their basic needs met, which is the difference between third and first world nations when it comes to poverty. How poverty relates to aspects of SEEP. Socially, poverty has the greatest impact on children. Poor infrastructures, unemployment, lack of services, and income reflect on their lack of education, malnutrition, violence at home and outside, and child labor are all consequences of poverty in society. It affects the society as a whole because it threatens to divide a nation based on different social classes and income inequality. Environmental. Poverty tends to put relatively more stress and abuse on the environment, which results in larger families due to high infant mortality rates and insecurity. These aspects cause problems, such as improper waste disposal leading to unhealthy living conditions and an overexploitation of natural resources. Economics. Economically, a high poverty rate declines the overall GDP of a nation, which can lead to economic recessions and raises costs such as health expenditures, and reduces productivity by about 1.3% of GDP. Political. Poverty has many political repercussions. It causes conflicts between the social classes and causes violent street protests, and then they eventually escalate to attacks on private property, especially in wealthy areas and major cities around the world. Also, impoverished countries struggle with political instability, poor governance, corruption, and high crime rates. Stakeholders. First, we have the influencers. They're the media, organizations such as charities that aid with poverty, and public poverty advocates who inform people about the issue. An example of a good influencer is the UNICEF organization. They help bring people out of poverty by providing them with their basic fundamental needs and helping people short-term and long-term. Then we have governance. Governments around the world are trying to accomplish a common goal, such as eradicating poverty by introducing different solutions to help build up their economy and give their citizens an overall better quality of life. Lastly, the consumers. Consumers is the general population of a nation affected by poverty in their everyday lives. People in poor living conditions generally are unemployed and stay home to support their families, which creates high unemployment rates and weakens a nation's economy because consumers are not buying goods. Next is the UN Sustainability Goal. Some of the goals to eradicate poverty set by the UN are by 2030, the UN wants to eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere, and in the same year implement nationally appropriate social protection programs and measures for all, and achieve substantial cover of the poor and the vulnerable. I believe that my solution can help achieve these goals by creating more jobs, which will lower unemployment rates, build up the global economy, and be the first stepping stone to a world without poverty. By having a healthy and stable economy, the government can focus on other issues such as funding renewable energy resources to fight climate change, or building proper schools for kids to get a higher education. Overall, when a country is not struggling with poverty and violence, the economy booms and people enjoy a better quality of life. Next is the fundamental concepts of globalization and trade. Economic growth is the main channel through which globalization can affect poverty. What researchers have found is that, in general, when countries open up to trade, they tend to grow faster and living standards tend to increase. Developing countries can benefit from free trade by increasing their amount of or access to economic resources that they may have not been able to achieve without trade. Another benefit of trade is that it can help boost a small nation's economy by providing them with the resources needed to produce consumer goods or services. Next is corporation or international venture. Many large businesses around the world and their CEOs have tried and continue to help to solve the poverty crisis. Several companies over the years have launched their own sustainability platform that is embedded in every aspect of their business. I'm going to use the example of Coca-Cola. 13 years ago, Coca-Cola launched a platform called Live Positively. Their goal was to create a positive difference in the world, and the company strived to achieve that goal by focusing on 7 core ideas of business sustainability. First was beverage benefits. They strive to offer beverages for every lifestyle and occasion while providing quality that consumers trust. Next was active healthy living. Support active healthy lives through product variety, nutrition, education, and physical activity programs. And lastly, community. Foster sustainable communities through economic development, philanthropy, and the creation of economic and social opportunities. Historical political facts. Poverty has been brought up in countless times in political debates and meetings, but perhaps the biggest discussion about the ongoing problem of poverty was put on the global scale at the New York Summit in 2005. At this summit, world leaders pledged wide-ranging steps on poverty, terrorism, and human rights. The summit lasted for about 3 days, and as much as 150 members of state attended. The heads of state of the countries who attended the summit came upon an agreement that they would pledge an additional $50 billion a year to fight poverty, and reaffirm their commitment to address the desperate situation in Africa by helping to boost foreign investment in the continent. This summit was perhaps the very first serious step into combating poverty. Government actions. Specific actions that the government would need to take in order to allow the implementation of my solution would be to raise the minimum wage, increase the earned income tax credit for childless workers, and support pay equity. After these actions are taken place in the government would be able to implement my ideas to spike employment and economic growth. In conclusion, I believe that eradicating poverty cannot be solved by just one nation. Every nation around the world must work together to reach the future UN goals of poverty and make it a reality. Through global free trade and charity organizations, we can aid developing countries and help them eradicate poverty, as well as create a safer and a more economically sustainable future for our children. Thank you for listening.